me just silence my phone as well.
And the meeting is being live streamed, so we are live on YouTube and also on the We Don't Have Time platform.
From there, right?
We always have time for We Don't Have Time.
It's a perfect name because everyone talks about We Don't Have Time almost once a day.
Okay, are we getting ready to start?
Yes, we are.
Perfect. Very welcome to this side event at UNEP at 50. And good afternoon from Nairobi, and good morning, good evening, or whatever, wherever you are in the world. We are very glad to have an audience, quite a large audience here in Nairobi, and also quite a lot of people joining us online in this event. The theme of this event is meeting the 2030 agenda within the planetary boundaries, a celebration of UNEP's 50-year anniversary. So this event is organized by the 2022 Initiative Foundation in collaboration with the Club of Rome and its Earth for All partners. We are here in Nairobi, Kenya, and together with me, I have Jane Kabubu Mariara, and we have several high-level speakers online. We are very glad to be able to be joined by Dr. Janis Popochnik and Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, from the Club of Rome, co-president, and Professor Jürgen Randers online. And also as co-host for this event, we have Stanley Neoni, who is also from the 2020 Initiative Foundation. So this is also an event that is in a series of events from the Club of Rome's Earth for All project for the launch of that report, and is also part of a series of dialogue meetings that the 2022 Initiative Foundation is arranging to go to create action towards Stockholm+50 and beyond. Later on, we will also be joined by Ambassador Johanna Lissinger-Peitz. She is ambassador for the Stockholm+50 UN conference. And we will also be joined by youth delegates that will be commenting what we have actually come up with, or they will also be part of the discussion dialogue meeting where we will come up with concrete actions that we need to take now. This is actually a historic moment in time. We are celebrating the 50-year anniversary of UNEP, the UN Environment Program that was formed at the Stockholm Conference in 1972. And we are also celebrating, in a way, the 50-year anniversary of Limits to Growth, this groundbreaking book that came out the same year as the Stockholm Conference in 1972. And we're very eager to get to know about the findings so far from the Earth for All report. So we're looking forward to getting to that input from all our speakers here. And later on have a dialogue around that. And you that are participating on Zoom will be divided into small breakout rooms during the dialogue sessions. We will be first creating a vision based on the learnings from the speakers from the Earth for All project, and later on come up with concrete actions that we can do now. So we cannot anymore talk about net zero 2050. We need to go from that to action by Stockholm+50, and later on 3 months intervals onwards towards reaching the SDGs by 2030. Now at the 50-year anniversary of UNEP, we are in several planetary crises. In spite of the fact that UNEP has made a lot of difference when it comes to global governance and to taking care of nature and in understanding that we are actually part of nature, we are in a serious situation. We are actually ruining. Based on the system that we're having, the economic system that we live in, we are ruining our life supporting system. So we need to change that. And also another thing that Olof Palme said at his speech back in 1972 at the Stockholm conference was that in the field of human environment, there is no individual future, neither for human beings nor for nations. Our future is common. We must share it together. We must shape it together. So that is very much the reason why we want to do the dialogue session after the presentations of the findings from the Earth for All report. And we're very curious to know about the findings, and the overall aim of the Earth for All report is to really come up with what changes, what is the situation, and what are the changes we need to see to reach the SDGs by 2030 within the planetary boundaries. So it's an honor and a privilege to be able to introduce as the first speaker today, Professor Jörgen Randers, and as also being a co-author of the groundbreaking book, Limits to Growth, and now part of the Earth for All project. You are the link between history and the future. So we are very curious to know what lessons from the Limits to Growth apply to today's burning challenges. And also, how does Earth for All seek to address these challenges? And also, what does science say that we need to do now to really act now? So very welcome, Professor Randers. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Helena. And good morning or evening or whatever to the rest of you. It's a great pleasure for me to get this opportunity to talk about the ongoing Earth for All project, which is discussing the global future in this century. The project is run under the auspices of the Club of Rome in conjunction with the 50-year anniversary of the Limits to Growth, as Helena has already mentioned. The Limits to Growth appeared in 1972, just a month or 3, if I remember correctly, before the Stockholm conference. The Limits to Growth warned about overshoot and collapse in the 21st century. So limits highlighted the risk that the human footprint would exceed the carrying capacity of planet Earth and then be forced back later to more sustainable levels. This warning helped establish the environmental movement that was fledgling at the time, including UNEP, and accelerated the human effort to constrain the human footprint to fit within planetary boundaries. The idea of one planet living, was born. Today, we're 50 years later, and we know that the world during these 50 years has actually followed the limits to growth scenarios from 1972, broadly speaking. Like in the limits to growth, the human footprint has continued to grow and now exceeds planetary boundaries in many areas, most worryingly in the area of climate change. Humanity has indeed ended in overshoot and is currently above planetary limits. As one visible and most obvious result, the planet is warming every year. But luckily, global society has not yet experienced collapse, at least not global collapse. Neither from resource scarcity, emissions of chemicals or toxics, land erosion, nor ecosystem depletion. But there are growing signs of local collapse, not necessarily driven by resource scarcity, pollution, or biodiversity loss, but caused by excessive social tension and conflict. We do see decline in human well-being driven by poverty, by inequity, by disempowerment, and sheer frustration with a slow response to global warming. So, what will happen during the next 50 years, which is the object of study in the Earth for All project? My answer, which you will now hear, is based on insights from a very long professional life and from the results of the ongoing Earth for All project, and particularly its new world model. My main conclusion is that, sadly, we will not see a strong response, a sufficient response to climate overshoot. And then please show my only slide, whoever is in control of the slide. So instead, what I fear that we will see something we call the too little, too late scenario, which is portrayed on the screen. Unless there is dramatic action, the world population, the red curve, will peak around 2050 at above 9 billion people. The world economy, the blue curve, will keep growing throughout the century. The global temperature, the black curve, will keep rising to roughly plus 2.5 degrees centigrade in the year 2100. Inequity, both globally and within countries, the gray curve, will continue to rise, and so will social tensions, at least during the first half of the century, and then perhaps starting to decline a little bit in the second half as society starts to respond. And in sum, the global result will be decline in average well-being, as shown by the green curve. Well-being will decline because global warming will gradually destroy the physical environment, and social tension will rise because life for the human majority will gradually become more and more unbearable as decades pass without fundamental solution of the problems of global poverty, inequity, and disempowerment, all while the global temperature continues to rise. Of course, there will be huge regional differences. In the rich world, we will see slow decline in well-being and rising inequity. In the global south, we will see lacking economic progress and enduring poverty. In some emerging economies, we will see temporary material progress. And in China, we will see the continuing rise of a world superpower. All of this, I believe, will happen on a backdrop of continued warming, scary extreme weather, biodiversity loss, and sporadic resource scarcity in new and changing niches. And you can now turn off the sad story, please. Because this is what we see in our project unless there is dramatic action, within the next couple of decades to turn these trends around. So the question is, of course, what to do? My colleagues and I have spent the last decade and written 3 books on the topic, trying to identify the smallest possible set of actions that are indeed able to solve the problem, to ensure rising well-being for the global majority on our finite planet. We now believe, and that is the topic of our study, that extraordinary efforts, we call them turnarounds, are needed in 5 areas. First, in the climate area, we need to shift from fossil energy to low carbon energy in order to stop greenhouse gas emissions. Second, in the poverty area, we need to eliminate absolute poverty worldwide using new development models freed from the Washington Consensus straitjacket. Third, in the food area, we need to change from conventional agriculture to regenerative agriculture and healthy diets in order to stop ecosystem destruction. Fourthly, in the population area, we must provide education, health, contraception, and opportunity to women in order to create a fair and stable society. And last but not least, in 5th place, we need large-scale transfer of income from the world's rich to the global poor in order to reduce inequity and the risk of revolution. In our view, we know very well what needs to be done to create a better future for the majority within planetary boundaries. Basically, we must do as Limit said 50 years ago, we must reduce the human footprint so it fits within the carrying capacity of the planet and still leaves sufficient room for nature so it also can thrive. And we must make sure that the rich pay the bill. Luckily, we know after all these years that the 5 turnarounds are technically feasible using existing technologies. Furthermore, we know that the cost is tolerable. It will not require more than 1 to 3% of global income to pay for the 5 necessary turnarounds. The turnarounds require the shift only of a few percent of the world's capital and labor from dirty to clean sectors. The bill is so small, it can easily be paid for by the world's 10% richest, who, after all, control 50% of world income. So, in the eyes of the project, the challenge is not to identify what needs to be done. The challenge is to make it happen, to agree, decide, and implement the 5 turnarounds, and to do it so fast that we stop the decline in well-being before social tensions rise beyond repair. The turnarounds will not happen by themselves. They are not profitable from the investor point of view, and they will require subsidies or bans to get going at scale and speed. This, in turn, will require political support from voters who do not typically like higher taxes or more regulation. Voters who justly fear the loss of fossil jobs that typically come first in the green shift. Gathering political support for strong action will be hard, but there is no alternative. As a central part of the Earth for All project, we have built a new world model to help answer the crucial questions: how fast must we act, and what will be the cost? Our model shows that it is possible to reduce the global overshoot and to create rising well-being for the majority before 2050. But it will require quick, strong, and coordinated action by national governments. In short, it will require a strong state and with a meaningful budget. So the real challenge is to gather broad support for strong collective action. I believe the only way is to pay for the necessary effort in unconventional ways. For example, by passing the bill to the rich minority. This has the advantage of reducing inequity and also reducing the rising social tension in societies. Another approach would be to pay what I call COVID style, with governmental loans that are not intended to be paid back. Luckily, the COVID response shows that this can be done. It is possible for national governments to act swiftly with force and still retain broad support for strong action. This must now be repeated in the effort to increase human well-being within planetary boundaries. Earth for All shows it can be done, but it also shows that it will require broad popular support for strong collective action and quickly before we get social collapse. Thank you. According to the note, I'm now passing the baton to the panelists, and I don't know who they are, so whoever wants to speak, please do so.
We cannot hear you, Helena. And also somehow my video has been turned off, so it might be good to turn it on. I don't know who has control.
So can you hear me now?
There we go. Oh, yes, we can hear you.
Oh, and there you are. Hear your video. That's great. Good to see you. So we will now go over to a panel discussion where we will get input from both, if you maybe move a bit further close to me, from Ms. Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, co-president of the Club of Rome, and Dr. Janis Powocnik, and as well Dr. Mariana Kabubu. No, sorry. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, there you are. Yeah. Change places. So, based on what we have heard from Professor Jörgen Randers, Sandrine, how do we address the planetary emergency and put in place a situation where we see the right to a short leverage, I mean, to get action now and to build a system of emergence instead of emergency? And where would we be in 50 years from now, or even in 2030, in 8 years from now? And also one thing that I'm very curious to know about, how would we make those 10% rich persons actually come up with the funding?
So thank you, Helena, and welcome to everyone. And I think that it's incredibly important that we all be here together. As Jürgen indicated, there are very deep links between actually the Stockholm Conference in 1972 and also the thinking of limits to growth. In fact, when Stockholm was opened in 1972, there was a direct reference to how the limits to growth had very much brought forward the urgency of addressing the fact that growth on a planet with finite resources could not continue in the way that it was. And so I think it's important today that we both look backwards and, as you say, we look forwards. Jürgen has very much referenced a piece of work which modelers from different areas are coming together to better understand how we don't waste another 50 years. Maybe Jürgen was not as forceful, but could have been, in saying very clearly that especially someone who was one of the original authors of the limits would have from the beginning said, what has happened, people? We find ourselves now in exactly the same scenarios that were predicted 50 years ago, and yet decision makers did not listen. So for us, this incredible body of work is one to put forward the scientific proof points to once again demonstrate, and we don't have the luxury of another 50 years, to say very clearly, this is what the science is telling us. We are in an extreme situation of biodiversity loss. We are in an extreme situation, and the IPCC has just reminded us again yesterday, of climate change. We are in an extreme situation, and I know Janis will reference this, of dependency on resources that we not need be dependent on, which are also creating wars and conflict and geopolitical constraints that we do not need to be in. This is because decision makers did not listen to esteemed scientists, multidisciplinary thinkers, academics, and other enlightened leaders who have said we must stop and start to transform our systems in order to really truly live within the planetary boundaries. So how can we do that now that we do no longer have the luxury of time? As Jürgen has very clearly indicated, these 5 turnarounds are a minimum. And why are they so important? Because we also have learned from our mistakes 50 years ago. I think part of what Jürgen was saying, which is so important, is one, we need to focus on equity and we need to focus on poverty. And if we don't focus on those two, before even thinking about food system transformation or energy system transformation, we will not be able to get the transformation we need. We can see it right now in terms of the Ukrainian crisis and the pressures that we have on the European market because of energy poverty and the fact that actually the price of gas will go up so astronomically. Instead of making the decision to invest now rapidly, and we should have already done it 10 years ago, in alternative energies, we are now going back to business as usual and opening up LNG stations and thinking about investing in nuclear. The other key point that Jürgen has pointed to, which is fundamental, we need to think very smartly about short-term levers for long-term systems change. We need to think about long-term planning, and this is not just one political solution. Long-term planning does not necessarily mean communism. Long-term planning means saving us from ensuring that actually we can continue to live on this finite planet. The other key point that Jürgen pointed to, which is very important, how can we be cost effective? What we have tried to do in Earth for All and what we continue to do in the Club of Rome, and we're working on a series of different projects to demonstrate this, is one, take the perversities out of the market, stop subsidizing what we should not be subsidizing. Dirty fuel, dirty agriculture. Ensure that we truly transform the system by placing actually a value on what is clean and green and better for human beings, rather than placing a value on what is dirty and destructive and not actually helping people's lives and livelihoods. And you can do that through a series of taxation policies. Not only have we been talking forever about carbon pricing, but we know that we can look at different types of taxation policies, different dividend policies, that the public sector can be much more effective by looking at public coffers in a way that truly channels capital to those things that actually will create safe lives and livelihoods within the planetary boundaries. And then I want to focus on a few key last points. As I said, you have to focus on the 3 E's. For me, that is equity, equality, empowerment. And we need to really think about the way in which, and of course, environment or ecology at the same time. This is for people, planet, and prosperity. We then need to think about, in our planetary emergency plan, you asked about emergence. And the Club of Rome already 3 years ago very clearly pointed to what does that look like in terms of key targets and commitments. And we came up with a series of very specific commitments, which we have put forward to policymakers. How we actually put in place a withdrawal of subsidies for fossil energy, how we triple annually our investments in renewables, how we focus, as Jürgen clearly indicated, on ensuring that we have the resources for regenerative agriculture and shift to regenerative and agroecology practices. But, and I'm going to end with this, which comes in back to those equity principles, the human dimension. Everything that we do at the club very much focuses on the human dimension. And the way in which we engage with other countries is to very much think through, how do we bring more people on this journey? How do we look at diversity? How do we look at indigenous peoples? How do we look at local communities? that this cannot just be top down. And for that, it brings us to our last point, which is value proposition. With Janusz, we came up with a systems compass, which was directed predominantly to Europe. But this systems compass looks at key value principles that we need to integrate across the globe in terms of our policy making. And they very much reflect the principles of well-being that we have also integrated in Earth for All. So my last point would be, we need short-term levers for long-term systems change. We need to ensure that we translate the proper values and place a value on what matters across the systems that we transform. And we need to ensure that we do it fast because we no longer have the luxury of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. That was a clear message that we really need to do. And I do think that I hope that we can do it. If we continue in this panel, I would like to ask you, Jane, as the president of the African Society for Ecological Economy, to support the implementation of the Earth for All. We need a different system. We need a lot of systems changes and a new economic system. So what is the situation in Africa today? Are there any examples of going towards that systems change? Can you see that?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Helena. And I'm very excited to be here. And I thank the Breakout Room for this opportunity. And then just to pick up from where Jorgen and Sandrine have spoken about, maybe I should actually just first start from the bottom, and then I can come up, because I think I don't want to break the very exciting discussion that has already started. And I would start by thinking about maybe where then, as the African Society for Ecological Economics, where we see maybe Africa with respect to maybe the work that we are doing in Earth for All and transformational economics. Because starting from the bottom, even starting thinking about the 5 turnarounds, these are actually all very pertinent issues in Africa. Think about poverty. I mean, where is poverty greatest? It's in Africa. Think about food issues. Africa, food security issues are very key. Think about energy, the need for renewable energy that has already been spoken about. Think about the population dynamics that Jorgen spoke about, the issue of empowerment, whether it's from the education point of view, whether it's providing marginalized societies and women with the means of livelihood, and of course, equality. Inequality is deepest in Africa. So one of the things that we look at in terms of transformation from the African Society of Ecological Economics point of view is how then can we use our society to ensure that we can advocate for transformation in some of these particular issues. But then, of course, we are doing that looking at the outcome that we can think about, again, picking up from maybe what I would call the findings from the Earth to All, for all, or the issues that have been discussed by, again, Jorgen and Sandrine, and say that, for instance, from the society point of view, we want to emphasize the focus of a number of things. One, improved access to investments in renewables and green industries, just exactly what we are talking about in Earth for All. Think about equitable distribution of resources, not just GDP, not just wealth, but also ecological economics, which is actually very clear, especially given that Africa really has to rely a lot of natural resources, which are not enough and which are not used in a sustainable manner. Then, of course, we've talked about reducing greenhouse gas emissions that has already been spoken about by my predecessors. Think about reducing deforestation and maybe increasing reforestation. What's can we do in Africa, especially in the light of increased desertification, the Saharan desert moving southwards? What do we do in countries where we have limited resources, but yet we are overmining the resources? We can think about leveraging on technology to save our planet, our continent, Africa. And then I think something that Sadrin has also brought about, the whole issue of thinking about indigenous societies, local communities, our heritage. We've had cultural communities that have really preserved the environment, but with change and modernization, that is no longer possible. So how do we look at, how do we preserve behavioral changes or instill behavioral changes that are friendly to our planet? And how do we build trust so that local communities then can take care of their environment? And finally, related to this, we can think about shifts in underlying systems, beliefs, and values. So basically, that's what I would say from the African Society for Ecological Economics. But then the question is, where are we on this conversation in Africa? I think the problem that we have, and it's not just from the point of view of thinking about transformative economics, it's basically discourse in general, where we know that we do have maybe the global kind of the global south, not marginalization as such, but maybe less participation from the global south. So you find that maybe there's less discourse, or there's less discussion, less work on transformative thinking from the global south. Africa not excluded. In fact, what it shows is that it's maybe only in South Africa, a bit of South Africa and a bit of Brazil, where we seem to have quite a bit of discussion on transformative economics. And I think even within the Earth for All, I know this is what we've been trying to do to see whether we can bring more of African thinking, maybe Latin American thinking, if you want to call it that way, and then maybe the Asian thinking. But basically, what we need is to try to enhance the contribution, the discussion from Africa and from the rest of the developing world, especially because there's the touch of the reality, what is happening on the ground. How can we use maybe the local resources, the indigenous knowledge, the local conditions to ensure that we can entrench transformative economics, to ensure that then we can move to a more equitable planet. And I believe that we've learned lessons from the pandemic crisis. We've seen some form of maybe resilience that we did not expect. How do we use this kind of knowledge? How do we enhance this to ensure that then we can move towards transformative thinking? So what I believe is that there are a lot of barriers maybe, but there are also opportunities. And we have learned about these opportunities from the pandemic. So maybe I could stop there for now, but I'm happy to come back and talk some more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would love to hear more about the vision for Africa. What do you think? Can this really be achieved, all the things that you mentioned, by 2030?
Okay, I think 2020 might be too ambitious, because how many years? 8 years?
8 years.
8 years. I think the experience we have maybe from going back, if I go back a bit, because we've tried many things in Africa, think about maybe the Millennium Development Goals, the SDGs and so forth. I believe that if we use what we are calling maybe in the Earth for All, what we are calling the giant leap, if we change our thinking and actually be very deliberate, we can achieve this. This is what we can achieve by the year 2020. We can't say that we can't achieve much within, 2030, sorry, yes. Within the 8 years, if we can change our thinking and adopt what we are calling the giant leap approach, which was discussed a bit by Jorgen in the keynote speech, then we can make quite some achievements. But if we continue with business as usual, doing what we've been doing, not even taking into account the lessons we have learned from the pandemic, then we would actually not achieve. So I'm positive we can do it. Thank you.
That sounds great. So let's just see to that this is done then. I would like to go over to Dr. Janusz Popopchnik as chair of the International Resource Panel. How important is the National Resource Optic? And also Earth for All is about the need for a systems change approach. What would be the most efficient way to implement this in practice, according to you?
Thanks, Helena. It's a real privilege to be in such excellent company. By the way, I'm also a proud Club of Rome member. But let me first introduce the panel, which I do co-chair with Isabella Teixeira, just in one sentence, and then try to answer to your questions. We are a science policy interface which is hosted by UNEP, brought together to produce the new insights on the management of natural resources optics, on its impacts, and also on the solutions. And when we say natural resources, what we actually understand beyond that, it's biomass, metals, non-metallic minerals, fossil fuels, all that it's called materials. And it's actually extracted from Earth. And on the top of that, we talk also about water and land. And we know from the IRP work, which was included in our most comprehensive report, Global Resource Outlook 2019, that basically extraction and processing of natural resources are the drivers of all aspects of the triple planetary crisis, which we talk about. So climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and you can include basically also the health implications. According to our report, our science, it's responsible for half of the global climate change, for over 90% of the global land-related biodiversity loss and water stress, and approximately for 1/3 of the global air pollution, as well as water, of course, and land pollution. We also know the trends, as mentioned by Sondrin before, that they are alarming. Material use, which, as mentioned, comprises from everything what is extracted from the earth, has tripled since the year 1970. And the data are telling us if we will not dramatically change our behavior, it will double again by 2060. So you can just imagine what the consequences on the triple planetary crisis would be. Therefore, we know that it's absolutely necessary to decouple the growth in well-being and prosperity from the resource use and also from its impacts. You mentioned why actually the systemic approach and systemic interventions are so important. I think they are crucial from the essential point of view that we refocus on, in the first place, on that we need to limit and lower the use of energy and resource use. We have learned again just this week basically how fragile our supply systems could be. And yes, we have to focus on decarbonization because it is indeed very important, but we also need to focus on decommodification, or if you want, dematerialization of the systems we depend on. We simply have to reject the assumption which is currently in our economic systems that this needs to be resource intensive. And this, of course, it's most important and urgent for high-income countries. And it is pretty clear who is most responsible for overconsumption and for overshooting the planetary boundaries. And it's also clear that the demand side and the overconsumption are currently not adequately addressed in our climate talks or other international efforts. So Jane is absolutely right that we need to end the still existing hidden imperialism, which is linked to the resource use, if we want to address these fairness and equity questions on a global and even national levels. So in the next report, which we are preparing for the year 23, the IRP wants to reshift the logic. So we want to move from the following the GDP logic to following the well-being logic. And we want to reshift also from looking to maximizing the outputs of the production sectors, which is a classical approach, to trying to maximize the provisioning systems, the human needs which are behind that. So this would allow us to address the challenges in a more systemic way, as well as to propose also the adequate policies on the production that is supply, as well as consumption that is demand side. If we focus only on the GHG improvements, for example, which we currently very much do, we can cause quite a lot of unintended consequences, ignore potential trade-offs, and even create future lock-ins and miss important opportunities which are connected to the demand side. So we need to think the whole system when designing the solutions to maximize effects and also the co-benefits. To close my introduction, maybe with just one example, you know, it's not only by greening and electrifying the car production as much as important it is also about how we reframe the entire mobility system, how we design solutions which would, in the first place, reduce the need for mobility, for example, in urban environment. Remember a simple fact: we do not need cars. We want to be and need to be mobile. In short, by taking the systems approach, we can turn difficult transition needs into big societal opportunities. And how we manage natural resources, which was the question in the first place, it's central to that. And this is also clearly acknowledged by the Earth for All report presented by Jürgen, in particularly in the climate and in the food area. But if we look a bit more broader, also the questions about poverty area, population, income transfer, which are more addressing the social and equity part, are in a way the other side of the same coin. We have to be aware that we can dream on about the environmental transition only if we will not simultaneously also address the questions of fairness, equity, and social questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Popocznik. And Jürgen Randers, you want to raise your... Thank you.
So thank you for your reactions. And I think one very good question was asked by both Helena and Jane, I think. So what can be done by 2030? You know, what's realistically doable by 2030? And I think there are two things that we should try to get done by 2030. The first is to change the goal, you know, in the direction of Janusz, that we move from rising GDP to rising well-being. And the second thing is that we agree on strategy. And I think that the simplest way of introducing an effective strategy would be to split the job between the developing countries and the rich countries. The developing countries should continue to try to expand their production as removing poverty as hard as possible. And then the rich world, who constitutes, you know, 80% of the footprint, they should take the job of introducing, you know, getting the global footprint down in such a manner that there is room left for the poor when they get richer. So there is, you know, this idea that all the 6 billion people who live in poor areas should now start by limiting their use of energy or resources or minerals is asinine, in my view. You know, it's the rich world that is using most of this stuff. They are rich enough to spend the money to get the effectiveness, the productivity, the technologies necessary in order to reduce the footprint, while the third world should do whatever they can in order to increase the productivity, the old-fashioned income, you know, of those nations. And this, I think, we ought to be able to do in 10 years, to, you know, agree on the goal, global well-being, and then split the job, you know, between the rich and the poor in a proper manner. And of course, inside each of the nations, one should of course have a democratic decision that the rich are going to pay the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I hope we can find ways of actually getting there. Thank you. Sandrine, please, welcome.
Yes, well, I wanted to build on Jürgen's excellent points, because we can find ways to get there. There are plenty of ways to get there. It's not a question of finding the ways, it's a question of the political will. And so I'd say, first of all, that exactly as Jürgen says, I mean, we now have well-being models that are being practiced in 5 nations. It's adopting those models that actually now are being used, that are bundling very different types of indicators, that are placing a value on education, on access to social services, on ensuring exactly, as Jürgen says, that we balance the difference between the wealthy and the poorest. And it's not just the difference between the North and most of the world, by the way. It's also the difference in many of our economies that now are deteriorating in front of our eyes. You can go to the United States and some of the wealthiest states like California and see the inequality in the amount of homeless in the streets. So this is the moment. And maybe the last point there is, we learned through COVID, for good or for bad, that actually when we were forced to, we could transform. We could put in place measures that had to be taken into consideration. And yes, some people were pretty pissed off, and they said it was an affront on their liberties. We can have that discussion another day. But the fact of the matter is that it showed us that our society could transform very fast. This is the moment to tap into that consciousness. What was most essential for people at the time of COVID? Ensuring that they were safe, making sure that they had access to healthcare, making sure they had access to food, clean water, that they had a roof over their heads, and that the friends and family were not dying from a pandemic. Decision makers should use this moment, and that's what's been happening in some ways through the recovery and the reform, but not to pump money back into the old systems, but really pump money into new systems that are going to build the resilience to future shocks and stresses, which we will have more of the pandemic, of obviously climate change impacts, and obviously also biodiversity loss and social tensions. So this is the moment, and we have 8 years. We cannot lose this moment or even get too caught up in a war and not think through what are the implications if we don't transform now.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. There are clear messages again, and yes, we can do it. So let's just do it. Jenna, please come in with a short comment. You're muted.
Yes, just to add to that debate, while I fully agree that we have to do everything what we can do in the short term, I think it is essential that at the same time, we do not lose the focus of the necessary systemic changes, which unfortunately cannot be done quickly. But we have to start fixing them. So the major problem for me is that today's contemporary economics, it's everything from financial system to production system, everything. It's organized in a way that they are looking to humans as external to nature. As the rest, it's actually subordinated to us and not as part of the nature too. And very likely, market economies are here to stay with us. And we do, yes, consumers and consumers and producers on the markets actually behave rationally. But this rationality is based on the signals that the nature is not valued. And that's why, of course, the consequences are as they are. So our short-term rational behavior, it's entirely irrational from a longer-term point of view. And we should simply start aligning the thinking of short-term market incentives, which we are sending to producers and consumers, with long-term public well-being needs and regulation. Currently, with regulation, we try to fix some of the things and sending producers and consumers on a responsible side, but the market is sending them on the irresponsible side. And it's like we would be rowing constantly against the flow of the river. So I think it's pretty much essential that we align those signals, because otherwise we will be in constant problems. And the real problem, and this is the last sentence which I will say, is that we, producers and consumers, got used not to pay those things. And that means that it will be quite a Sisyphus work, which has to be connected with the fairness and social part of the transformation if we want to be successful. There are various kinds of models which can help us, like everything as a service or extended producer responsibility, but still don't miss the real need for system change transformation, in particularly for redesigning the economics in which we are living.
Thank you very much. And before we go over to the dialogue session, Jane, would like to have a short 1-minute comment, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe my only comment is again to agree with my co-panelists, maybe 2-3 points. First, picking from the discussion that yes, the first thing that we must think about, and Sadrine has brought it, inequality is not just between countries, there's inequality within countries, and maybe it's worse within the poorer countries, the kind of inequality you find within the poorer countries, whereby then, especially those who can make decisions versus the poor, you find that then when we are addressing issues, even issues to do with, for instance, the pandemic, then we tend actually to create further inequalities instead of resolving the issue. So it's not just the divide between the global south and the global north, but first maybe start within, and then we can look at between countries. I do agree on that. And then there's the issue of prioritizing basic needs and reducing inequalities. I think that was the first point that Jürgen brought about, so that then we are changing the goals towards well-being. How do we do that? We can only do that by prioritizing the basic needs and then again dealing with those inequalities. 3, there's the issue, I think it's Sadrine who has brought it, about what I would call reducing maybe our dependence, the human dependence on the biosphere, because this is the only way in which we can ensure that we have long-term sustainability of the biosphere. And finally, of course, Janice has talked about the systems change, which really must be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jane. And thank you very much to all our panelists and keynote speakers. So we are very much looking forward to getting the final report just before the Stockholm+50 UN conference, as I've understood. So we can really get into action, but we're actually going to get into action already now. Because now we would like to invite all participants on Zoom and here in the green room to, first of all, think about a vision for yourselves for a sustainable world. What would that imply? We don't have papers and pens, but maybe you could draw for your mind and write a few words. There will be a code to a Menti shared. Stanley, I think you have that.
It's online now, Helena. Mimasha is going to take us through the Mentimeter exercise. Over to you, Mimasha.
So please go to www.menti.com and use the code 7573-2220. And you will be directed to a question. What is your vision of a sustainable future? You can type in your answer and press enter, and it will show up in the screen for us to read and follow. Once again, the code is 7573-2220.
And if for any reason the Mentimeter doesn't work for you, you can, of course, put your vision on the chat.
We have a few answers. Working 10 hours a week and using the rest of my time to produce social, cultural, and ecological value. Someone has mentioned vision for a sustainable future could be a happy life for the next 7 generations after me, or at least. Interesting. Healthy planet, healthy people, healthy and equitable economy. Thank you for that. A society in which everyone recognizes the importance of caring for their neighbors and for our planet, and begins to see that this approach is better for our economies and financial systems too. A future that is both material and metaphysical. A future that reconnects with the human living, degrowthing energy flows and resources. Flourishing, caring local, gross national happiness instead of GDP. A future that takes into consideration people, planet, prosperity equally and optimizes systems change for greater well-being. A future that incorporates well-being for all sentient beings. A home with my family, kids and grandkids, close to nature and with food and a secure future, creative time, health services and sense of belonging, a community. Someone says symbiocene. Very interesting comments. A future that uses decisions that always embraces the 7 generations to future, caring for self so we care for others, so we can care for places and planet. So please keep these comments and feedback coming. We will certainly record them and share them after the meeting. Thank you.
Back to you, Helena.
And thank you very much to all of you for your input to a sustainable vision for the future. So now we will go from these sustainable visions of yours and try to think of what actions could you take now within the coming 3 months. In just 3 months' time, it will be the final day of the Stockholm+50 UN conference. So what would you have been able to achieve already by then? So
the code for this Mentimeter, if you go once again to www.menti.com, please use the code 9209-5905. Once again, the code is 9209-5905. And I'll repeat the question. What actions will you take to make your vision, the vision that you entered just now, a reality within the next 3 months?
Can you put back this code on the screen?
Sure, Jürgen.
It
Do
is
you
on the,
see my
it is
screen?
on the top.
It's on the
Yes.
top, Jürgen.
It's on the top, Jürgen.
All the way at the top.
It looks like this is a difficult question for everyone. It's taking longer. So we do have an input here. Pressure decision makers into actually representing my best interest and that of future generations. Very good point. Spreading the idea. I will be that voice. That's very bold. Holding a presentation or conversation in my own community, writing articles, spreading awareness about the urgency, helping, oops, that just vanished. Helping my community identify their own barriers. Someone says, lobby my government to propose ecocide to be the 5th crime against humanity, ecocide, I think, and be incorporated in the UN Rome Statute, support my government to execute their policy of well-being. Someone wants to work on a video that demonstrates how worldviews based on developmental psychology communication can encourage people of different worldviews to take similar climate actions. Very interesting. Someone says advocacy, share the vision with 10 organizations. reduce my own footprint, contact elected officials, volunteer to facilitate community deliberations on local climate action. Very bold actions here. Take time for a pause. I agree with that. Start seeds, grow my food in the community garden, focus on collaboration and dialogue in my work. Interesting. Help empower more people, create strategies to foster more conversation and capacity. Working in my local community, centering care, love for nature, and degrowth. These are all very motivating comments and feedbacks. Thank you very much for engaging. We will certainly share these as well once the meeting is over. But you're welcome to keep them coming and keep sending more comments.
Thank you. Thank you for
Over to you,
reading,
Helena.
for reading that, Mimasha. I think we are going into breakout rooms now.
Yes.
Renee, are you ready with the breakout rooms?
Yes.
Elena, what is the question for the breakout rooms?
The breakout rooms actually has a similar question. But please continue elaborating on those questions. The actions that you can actually do now to come several steps further towards the vision for a sustainable future by 2030, because I'm sure there are a lot of things that you can do already these coming 3 months. Please divide into breakout rooms for, I think we will do that in maximum 10 minutes because we're running short of time. And then we will come back in the room. There will be a Google form that you will be able to answer in the breakout rooms.
Okay, I'm now going to assign the breakout rooms automatically, and there will be 3 to 4 people per room.
Hi, Renee. Renee?
Yes, I'm not sure if the audio is still being broadcast through the streaming.
I was alone in my room, so I came back.
So was I.
You are actually being broadcasted. I'm not sure if it's meant to. Can we change that? The fact that they're broadcasted, or maybe go into a breakout room and talk.
Emily, you hear me?
Yes, I do. I don't know what happened. I was in a room and there was nobody in there.
So was I. I'm wondering, should we, I don't know if I can go to another room.
I can move you into a room. I can see here that some people, where there were only 2 people, and if you're too early, then the other may not have arrived.
Okay. Or you can create one with the 2 of us, and then we can.
Yeah, yeah. I can move you to room 3.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute. No, you are in room 3. Can you still join room 3? Emily?
Oh, hold on. Yes, join.
Okay. Let's see. Stanley, I move you to room 3. And if you can join that.
Rene, mute yourself.
Yes.
Somebody making noise. Can you please mute yourself?
Is it me who's not muted, possibly? I'm on a bike.
Yes, I think so. Thank you. Thank you, Toya. Please mute again. Okay, welcome back from the breakout rooms. And we do hope that you have come up with some very great ideas for your actions. We have a little bit short of time, but we would like to hear at least from one or two of you, maybe hear from the room in the green room. Do we have a microphone? Do we have a microphone for the participants? Okay, perfect. So, what did you come up with? Carmen, for example.
Well, for the next 3 months, I'm going to keep on working for Stockholm+50 as co-chair of the major groups and trying to see and to get information how civil society can engage with the process, and trying to engage the civil society that is linked to basically environmental issues. So I think their voices should be like the most important ones during Stockholm+50, and I think I will try to focus my effort on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carmen. And you, Gratna, as focal point for the Children and Youth Major Group. It's about your future we're talking about here. What is your action?
Helena, there is a request to direct the camera towards the speaker, please, if it's possible.
The speaker can direct towards the camera as well. I can face the camera. Face the camera though. The camera is there. Oh, there. Yes, thank you. I didn't particularly join a breakout because I've been working, although I can tell you from my own personal breakout thinking that I think with, Stockholm+50, we all have to look at what exactly what does success look like, right? So what would be a measure of success when it comes to Stockholm plus 50? What kind of outcomes, what kind of engagements, what kind of substantive results that we are looking at, that we would define success on the Stockholm plus 50 as? And I think the consultations that are upcoming, or the work that has to happen in the next few weeks, has to sort of reflect on those things. So what are our, some success criteria, both on a national level, but then on a broader multilateral level? Thank you.
Thank you.
So one thing, Helena, I need to say is that I posted on the chat a Google form which people can continue to engage through by putting in their vision, the actions they are going to take within the next 3 months. And I've also posted We Don't Have Time, which is another platform where you can continue the discussion about the vision and the actions that you are going to take moving forward. I also posted something called Dream for Earth, where you can live create a short video, post it, and talk about your dream so other people can be inspired to do the same.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And looking forward to getting these actions into practice. Let us now, we're glad to be able to welcome Ms. Johanna Lissinger-Peitz, Ambassador for Stockholm plus 50. So very welcome here. For some final comments, please join us here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Helena, for inviting me. And first of all, I have to apologize because I do think it's slightly rude to come to give concluding remarks when you haven't been able to join the session. So just to be very honest with that, but it was either those moments or not at all, and then I choose to come. So thank you for that. I think we are also, at least I am, in a time of the day when we don't need long speeches. But there are two things that we started with this week, and I think it was Kenya in the very first statement they made this week in the session, on saying that if we destroy nature, nature is unforgiving. Those words stayed with me throughout the week. And I think also he continued, we have not listened to science, we have not listened to nature, and this is why we are where we are. So your question, Helena, on what we can all do, not just in our planning process, because we do have sometimes a tendency to plan for the next meeting, but looking beyond that, looking beyond Stockholm. Stockholm is an accelerator for action, but it's not necessarily what we only do the next 3 months, but it's how we set the target for the 2030 agenda, and how we use, in a way, every day, but also how we use every moment in the multilateral context to do our best together. And we had a discussion with our one of our youth delegates earlier this week, and I felt amazed in a way that when you represent, indifferent on what country you come from, when you represent the major groups and stakeholders, you are unified in the messages and the priorities. And I think you have an extremely important role in creating that unification and sending that message to your governments, so that some of your priorities that is discussed here today and that is discussed in all of the rooms also become the priorities of the governments. I think it was Jugrakna who asked the question, what are your success criteria for Stockholm? It's not probably a question you will respond to here and now, but when you have reflected on it and when you have the response, I think I would be extremely keen to learn about that, because some of you have been hearing me saying this quite a few times, but I think if we are to trigger change, we need to be able to prioritize and prioritize to identifying how do I identify success and what is my contribution. So I think from myself, from our government, and just a sincere appreciation from all of the work that you have put into these 2 weeks, and that I know that you're already putting into Stockholm plus 50 and beyond that also, and building the narrative from environment, climate, pollution, and being able to, and biodiversity, and being able to handle those triple crises in a way that we achieve more together than one by one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johanna. And thank you very much to all. Applause to all of you. And to conclude, before we start celebrating UNEP at 50, we would like to say that we are preparing for our kickoff event. That's where we have the ball. A kickoff event for Stockholm+50, the 1st of June in Avicii Arena, which is the world's largest spheric building in Stockholm. And the purpose of that event is to really get the delegates into action and to have a dialogue with Greta Thunberg and climate MAPA activists, and to set moonshot pledges and really get into a mode of action. So we can make Stockholm+50 the game changer it needs to be. So
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you all the speakers and all participants for being here. We look forward to getting to know more about your answers, about the actions, and now let's do it. Let's go ahead. We can do it. Yes, we can. Thank you very much.